Great. Scott,
How are you, sir?
I was just telling John that when I watched your affordable housing, by far the best show John has done. I learned so much and realized that maybe you should keep your mouth closed. You might learn something.
Well, it's as I pointed out to people, it's amazing what you can absorb when you do something for 15 years. So it's
I was stunned. I was just like, wow, that was great.
super. And a lot of excitement with that these days in Connecticut. So
Seems like it. Seems like everything is 830G.
and then we get into 830J, and then we get into all sorts of other fun stuff.
Oh boy, really?
Can't have enough initials and acronyms.
Nice
Okay.
looking
Ned-
sign, Joe.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay, good. We can hear you. I guess you're looking good.
Should be, yes.
ooh, is everybody a real estate czar?
No, we have all kinds of czars in the room. We have Russell Barksdale, which you probably know. I'll take his mute off. Let's see. He runs Waveney Care Center.
Oh,
He
yeah,
was in- He
my
was in-
father-in-law was there. I spent a lot of time there, Russell. He couldn't
Scott,
hear either.
Scott Hobbs is here representing construction.
Oh,
How are you doing? Good seeing you.
nice to see you. Part of the great Hobbs family of house construction?
That's correct. I'm incognito with my winter whiskers on, so I'm trying to make sure people don't really know who I am.
I've kept you busy over the years.
Yes, you have. Appreciate it.
Scott wants to thank you personally for making sure that he kept the engine going during the early days of COVID. And I know the realtors feel the same way.
Kept you working, Scott.
Absolutely. I mean, you can imagine how strange it was to be able to work in Connecticut and literally a mile across the border, having a job site shut down because, of course, in New York, the virus was much worse. Literally 1 mile away. So we appreciate it.
You could play golf in Connecticut too.
Right? Letting a few
All
people-
right, David Lehman's on. That's good.
All right, there we go. Okay, making him co-host so he can speak.
David, good seeing you again.
Great to be here. Good afternoon.
All right. Excellent. So let's begin. It's 4 o'clock. This is episode 46 of Boroughs and Burbs. I'm joined with my co-host Roberto Cabrera in New York.
How are you?
And Scott Hobbs is always my co-host out here representing construction and affordable housing, which we'll get into in a little bit. But episode 46, we're very pleased, very honored to have Governor Ned Lamont, Governor of Connecticut, and his chief
Everything.
economic advisor and commissioner of all things economic development, David Lehman. So very happy to have you both on the call. I don't know if you want any opening remarks or should I just dive right into the questions?
Dive right in.
Okay, marketing. Governors have become the chief salespeople for their states. And I understand you went to Israel last week on a recruiting mission. So I want to know, what is the pitch for Connecticut in 2022?
Well, first of all, like I come out of the business world, and if you don't believe in your product, you're going to be a lousy salesman. And I think that Connecticut, had a bad rap, and we were really down on ourselves for many, many years there. With some reason, by the way. We were losing jobs, we're losing people. GE, last one out, turn out the lights. So first thing I had to do was, I believe in the Connecticut. I believe we got the best education system in the world. I believe we have the best workforce in the world. I think we're stabilizing our fiscal situation, which lurched from crisis to crisis there for a generation. But that's not what I told Israel. When David and I, took the trade delegation to Israel, it was, John, it was really good. We were the first state to be there since COVID. That means in over 2 years. And one of the first things that came to realize is that, you know, all the other states are little states like Connecticut. They hire a lobbyist or an advocate there, and occasionally they get a fax and you get some information. And I got to tell you that there are a bit of 300 Israeli companies that have moved to New York, and maybe 3 have moved to Connecticut. So I'd like to think that now they think about New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And what we tried to tell them was a couple of fold. You know, Stanford's is as close to Kennedy Airport as, you know, the west side of Manhattan. So geographically, it works. We told Prime Minister Bennett about Connecticut and the lifestyle and the values and, you know, a strong, diverse population, including a big Jewish population. And Prime Minister Bennett said, believe me, I know. I went to camp in New Haven. That's a big plus, let me tell you. Everybody else, I got to, you know, spell Connecticut for him. So that was amazing. And then we
I love the fact that you were first and you showed up yourself. You didn't just send David in there, but as you said, you're the first state after COVID and you went personally. I think did it work?
Did it work, David?
Yeah, listen, we're in the middle of the follow-up right now, John, but having a consistent relationship and then doing the blocking and attacking afterwards, I'm very optimistic we're going to see a lot of collaboration and some foreign direct investment as well.
David, we're making big moves into telehealth and telemedicine at Waveney Life Care Network, and all those companies that are being created right now in that area, in that genre, are coming out of Israel. So if we can help in any way with some of those startups, we'd be happy to.
Absolutely, Russell, and good to see you again. And if I may, just to follow on in terms of the elevator pitch, John, for Connecticut, I mean, this is a state that is growing for the first time in a while. We're growing in people. We're also growing in the number of businesses here. So the state's seen a 50% increase in business starts since the pandemic. We've seen more than 30 businesses expand or relocate to Connecticut. Governor Lamont is the first business person in 3 decades to lead the state, and he understands the importance of tax certainty. We're actually working on reducing taxes right now, but also fiscal stability. This will be the 3rd year in a row the state has seen a surplus. So it's a different Connecticut than I think many people knew, and we want to get that word out.
Where are they coming from? I mean, with all due respect to my New York partner, are they typically they come from New York? They raise a family here, send their kid, educate their kids here, and then they go to Florida. Is that still the pattern?
We're looking to change the latter part of that pattern. So when we look at the data, the 4 states where we're seeing net in-migration, New York is by far the biggest, not surprising, but also Massachusetts, New Jersey, and California. And you've actually also seen, and listen, 2 years don't make a trend, but you've seen less out-migration as well from the state. So on a net basis, you have seen a lot more families come in, but those are the 4 states, and Washington, D.C. as well, where you've seen people net move into Connecticut.
Okay. Let me ask you something. So John and I always have this back and forth with regards to all the people went to Connecticut. A whole handful of people are also coming back. He also insists that, you know, people are not, he says, the train station across from my office, it's the parking lot, it's empty. No one's coming back. And of course, there's hybrid working and people are only, you know, now in New York, they're asking people to come back to the office. However, it's not going to be every day of the week. It may be 3 days of the week or whatever the case may be. And there's a hybrid situation there. But what I'm curious about is at a certain point, everybody's going to be back in the office probably most all of the time. And the people that are hybrid out in Connecticut, are they going to be, you know, and there's also a turnover of jobs. When someone's in New York and they're trying to build a culture in their company and 5 or 6 employees are in Connecticut, but they have 4 or 5 people knocking on the door to be there every single day. What happens then? Because the jobs are here for the most part. And I mean, unbiased, because the people that went out there, their jobs are here and they're working remote to their jobs here. What happens when there's that turnover? How do you incentivize them to stay in Connecticut? Are there jobs? My understanding was we had someone on our program talking about Connecticut, a guy named Francis Pickering. He was saying that the jobs had actually declined since COVID and hadn't recovered yet, but they had been declining since 1997. So can you just talk about that a little bit?
Governor, you want to start or do you want me to go first?
Kick it off.
Yeah, so a couple things, Roberto, and great question. And listen, if anyone on this Zoom or on the podcast has a sense of how many days back in the office in New York or San Francisco or whatever city versus remote, that is a multi-billion-dollar question these days. So I think we believe in what we see in the data is some amount of remote work is here to stay. I don't know if that's 4 days in the office or 4 days out of the office or somewhere in between. In terms of Connecticut's labor force, though, our labor force is roughly 97% of where it was pre-pandemic. For the Northeast region, that actually is quite well. We've not fully recovered all the jobs, but we're at 97% of where we were in the beginning of 2020. In addition, depending on how you want to classify full-time employment, there's between 50 and 100,000 unfilled jobs in Connecticut. So the bigger issue we have is getting people back into the labor force. We saw a lot of, in particular, women ages 25 to 45 leave the labor force, hopefully on a temporary basis, and they come back during COVID. But the bigger issue we have is trying to get those jobs filled. There are lots of jobs in finance, in manufacturing, and beyond in the state of Connecticut. Governor?
Look, we cheer on New York, first of all, Roberto. It's the global capital, finance capital of the world, and Connecticut is a part and parcel of that region. So, that said, I think a lot of people are going to stay. We see that not just in terms of housing sales, which you know more about than I would. I see that in terms of folks registering their kids in school, increase in our school population, not just in Fairfield County, but the Valley, right up New Haven beyond. I think the tax differential with New York is as big today as it was before we had an income tax. So I think there are some changing dynamics. I think the most important one, though, is what you bring up in terms of work. I mean, with this infrastructure bill, whatever you think about it, we're going to be able to take a good 15 minutes off the commute from Stamford to New York within, 5 years or so. And I think you're going to find more and more people doing a hybrid. And I think from a tax point of view, there's going to be more and more reasons to have Nexus in New York City, pay 7% instead of 14%, and be able to have your kids educated with our schools open. So I think some of this is permanent. I think that's good, but I hope it's not bad for New York.
I'm not worried about New York. I can tell you that.
Okay.
So you hear that, Roberto? We're getting a bullet train, and not only is it Greenwich that's commutable, but you're going to see people commuting from Bridgeport, New Haven, because we're going to have a much faster train.
So, but is it all that influx of people that you're expecting? Is it going to overrun your school? Is it going to overrun your infrastructure? I mean, how do you manage that?
No. I think just the opposite. Like David said, we were flat as a pancake for 30 years. And a lot of our schools outside of, Fairfield County were underpopulated. We were talking about merging schools, and small towns were barely on their own 2 feet. That has changed right now. We have an increase in student population, and we have capacity in those schools to handle that. And, Newtown still has some room to grow.
Yeah, and I would just to underscore the point, you're seeing the state of Connecticut from 2010 to 2020, Roberto, grew by about 60 basis points. It was actually quite low relative to other states. But what you've seen, again, over the past 2 years, in particular in places like Stamford and New Haven, where what COVID, I think, has taught at least some people in the near term is the small to medium-sized city is now hip again, and the ability to have many of the amenities that a New York has at a lower cost is appealing to many. Stamford, just for and I see some folks are very familiar with it here, but Stamford's one of the fastest growing cities in the state. New Haven is second. Stamford is the fastest, and it grew 11% over the previous 10 years. That's on par with some of the fastest growing cities out there, and we want to make sure that growth continues, and we think we can handle it.
So if we're not relying entirely on the commute, but we're trying to attract businesses and people to Connecticut who can work here, not just live here, what kind of industries are part of the vision for the next century in Connecticut? What kind of industry? Is manufacturing part of that equation, or is it all high tech, biotech, fintech?
I'll start if you want, John. You see what was in the greater Stamford area, and that was hedge funds and banks and financial centers. And we came over, the UBS building is empty. The world is changing. Banks are downsizing. Now we have DCG and some of the leaders in cryptocurrency and fintech moving in. I think that's a transition that's going to greatly benefit, Fairfield County over the next generation. Moving down up Metro North, you've got New Haven. Yale was, it's always been a great school, but now it's commercially relevant in the sense that when it comes to life sciences and biotech and even, quantum computing, Yale is a leader. And David will tell you, we're starting up a 101 college, which is going to be one of the great research, labs. We filled that up. 102 college is in the offing right now. And a lot of those guys who are going to go to Boston, because that's where all the cool kids are saying now it's twice as expensive in Boston. And I have a hard time holding an employee because they constantly get recruited away to, Amgen or something right down the street. New Haven has a lot of value there. And finally, you mentioned manufacturing. A lot of that's Southeast Connecticut, but the supply chain is all over. And you got EB, they're going to be hiring a minimum of 1,000 people a year for the next 5+ years. Same thing at Pratt & Whitney. Hopefully the same thing at Sikorsky. And then you got hundreds of other companies in their supply chain. And I'm kind of, 20 years ago, all the manufacturing was moving to China. 20 years later, a lot of it's moving back to the United States, and we can compete. We can compete because it's more capital intensive, less labor intensive, and I got to make sure we have the best labor force in the world.
So what I hear you saying is technology, education is a major industry for our state, and not only educating little kids, but you're saying at the college level, education is one of the things that Connecticut does best. And now next generation manufacturing. Is it fair to say those are the three big ones?
Yeah, those are really important. And then I'm trying to, the best and the brightest come to Connecticut to get educated. Then half of them, go off to San Francisco or something like that. So we've got a bill through the legislature right now that says, the big businesses already do this. Now for the small businesses, if you hire a Connecticut graduate and you forgive their student loan over, say, 3 or 4 years, we'll pay for half of it with a tax credit. So I want companies to have an incentive to hire local, and I want these graduating kids to have an incentive to stay here in Connecticut.
So with that in mind, we've got a dividend, we've got a surplus this year. And so the question for both of you is, so if that's who we're trying to attract, and we're trying to keep people from leaving the state, we're trying to attract businesses and people into the state, why are we spending the surplus on a property tax rebate? Why is that the best use of the money?
I think it's really important. We have high property tax. Our income taxes, medium to high, and sales taxes medium to low. Our property tax is a killer. It's a killer to the middle class. It's ruthless to folks on fixed income as it goes up. And so I tried to make, a little bit of a difference there and start bringing back the tax credit that makes it a little more affordable. And most importantly, on the cars, that's where you're going to see $300 or $400 savings. And that helps commercial as well as, folks driving their own cars. And because of the tax differential when it comes to the mill rate on cars. So trying to, lead by example there. The other thing we're doing, you mentioned all the old people are moving down to Palm Beach. I mean, oh boy, that's boring. But that said, at least we've eliminated, I hope we're going to be eliminating the income tax on pensions and 401k. I think we're going to pass that within the next month or two. And that doesn't help, the richest guys, but it helps the middle class folks who are thinking about where they want to be for the rest of their lives.
Yeah,
Wow.
if I could just add on to that, John, to the governor's point, the property tax, it is the most regressive, and it's where we, Connecticut, stand out the most on the high side. So I know many people want to address the income tax and others, but in terms of the economy over the next few generations, getting the property tax that's in line, that's not a burden. Again, it's 100% paid by Connecticut residents. That's where we want to be the most mindful in our opinion. And that's why you're seeing the efforts there in terms of assisting the middle class and below to reduce that burden, which is outsized relative to other states.
Is there a way to reduce the income tax though? I mean, you had said it's moderate to high. I would say it's at the top 2, 3, 4, how can you do something with that?
Say that, David.
Yeah, thanks for the easy softball, Governor. The short answer is it's hard, Roberto, and I want to be precise here. When you look at it, and I know everyone's got a ranking, and we're very high right there with New York, New Jersey, and California. But the reality is the top marginal rate is much lower than those 3 states here in Connecticut. If you look at it on a scale of 1 to 50 states, we're around 36 or 37. So we're definitely higher than average, but some, like the Tax Foundation, put us in a group because of how much money it raises. The reality is the delta, as the governor said, between our high rate and other states is actually widened, where we are not as high as where we were. The reality with the income tax is it generates roughly 50% of the state's $22 billion budget. So it's $11 billion. And I just think even outside of politically, but practically, how do you come up with that type of funding through other taxes or fees? I think it's quite hard. So I think the first thing we need to do is continue to pay down unfunded pension obligations, which the governor did last year and will do again this year. And as we start to work through that and keep the fiscal house in order, I think we can talk in the future about income taxes. But in my opinion, getting dealing with the unfunded pensions and the property tax should take precedent.
Hey, Roberto, I would, hey, look, you guys got by pretty well without an income tax until 1992. What's the matter? Keep going. I mean, I'd say 3 things. 1, interest, dividends, and capital gains were killers. They've been cut dramatically. Number 2, back then, the corporate income tax paid for 26% of our bill. Today, there's really not much corporate income tax. It's too easy to move your assets around and your nexus there. And thirdly, as David alluded to, they just cheated back then. They made big pension and healthcare promises to people. They didn't pay a dime. They said somebody else is going to do it. And that was becoming a real lodestone, as you know, in terms of the perception of the state. So, for the first time in history, at least we paid down, 3 or 4 billion of that, which is going to save future taxpayers, hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And with some decent returns the last couple of years, we're paying down the pensions pretty aggressively for now.
So I know that most of the people on this call are realtors. And if there's one thing realtors know about, it's taxes. And we sell the benefit of moving to Connecticut because of the relatively low property taxes that we're offering, 18 mill rate in Greenwich of like 12 per million. And in Darien, New Canaan, Westport, some very low taxes relative to comparable towns in Westchester and a comparable value maybe in New Jersey. So lowering property tax is, a property tax is something we're very sensitive to. I guess I'm a little surprised that property tax, the car tax though, doesn't have the same visibility. So what you're saying is you're not getting the political points for giving this, but you're saying it's the right thing to do.
John, if I can just make a slight amendment or to the comment before the governor jumps in. In Lower Fairfield County, we are blessed with low mill rates relative to the rest of the state. So in Greenwich, where I live too, 12 mills is the lowest in the state. And yes, it's very attractive relative to Westchester, New Jersey. We should be selling that, but and a lot of that is because of the significant residential and commercial bases that many towns in Lower Fairfield County have. Many parts of the state don't have that. So when my comment before about our property tax rate, that was statewide, is where it really jumps out.
Got it.
Sorry, Governor, I didn't mean to jump in there.
That's good.
So there is so this gets me to the legislature question, which is a big one in my mind, that your agenda, which is of cutting taxes and paying down those pensions, is not always followed by the legislature. I do see Will Haskell on the call. I don't know if he wants to since we're talking about the legislature, I'll ask him to unmute his mic. But the legislature doesn't always seem to be on board. They are right now introducing a 2% property tax statewide on houses over $1.4 million. And I know that the Connecticut Board of Realtors is upset about that and sent some testimony up to Hartford about that. So can we talk about the legislature and what it's going to take to get the legislature in sync with the executive branch to lower my taxes?
Well, I'll start and then let Will take off. There's 187 legislators. They're all here. They're all floating their trial balloons. They're all getting a headline in the New Canaan newspaper. And relax. I mean, there's one governor, and there's a lot of hoops you got to go through. I'm the first governor not to raise taxes in 30 years. We're not going to, screw around with some of that stuff you were talking about, John. And there are a lot of stuff that come from the left and the right that feeds the base, but it's not who Connecticut is.
So as long as you're sitting in that chair, I don't have to worry about some of those crazy ideas.
I think that's right.
All right, that's very important to hear. I know that.
Are you, Haskell? Are you there?
Come on, Haskell.
While Haskell's unmuting, I would say the governor's been very vocal, John, on his view on taxes to the legislature. But as he said, legislators have their own ideas and they raise them. That's the process, which is great. But the governor's been very clear on no new taxes.
Okay.
Hey,
Will,
John.
I don't know if Will wants to jump in, but I think getting that message out there is important.
Hey, everybody. I'm on public transit, unfortunately, so I can't weigh in too heavily, but it's always a pleasure working with the governor's office. I think he and I think along the same lines here, and it's a give and take over the few weeks of the legislative session that remain. But I think that we're heading in a good place, and there are many allies for the governor's agenda in the legislature as well.
Lower my taxes, Will Haskell. Okay, that's a nice segue into the legislature. Let's say you rub the magic lamp and the genie gives you 3 wishes with the legislature. What are we asking for? What do you want for your agenda if the legislature would give it to you?
Number one, the numbers have to add up. Stop coming in and telling me you want this, that, and the other thing and figure out how to pay for it. If you want to be a co-equal branch of government, the numbers have to add up. And that means we have a cap on spending. You, the legislature, set that cap on spending. So if you want to spend more, say, on daycare, which is really important, it helps people get back to work, where would you cut on the other side? I think that would be message number one. Broadly speaking, I wish every legislative district had to be a right angle instead of these salamanders, so that more legislators had some urban constituents and suburban constituents. So they had to make some of the same balances that I do. Right now, the legislative districts are bluer than they've ever been or redder than they've ever been. And that does not, help the spirit of compromise. What's the third one, David?
No, I was just going to say a lot of the ideas in your budget that you referenced, Governor. So, for example, the student tax credit. I think there are ideas that we really want to incentivize people to stay in Connecticut and work here and make it more affordable for them and do that through their employers providing this tax credit here. So a lot of great ideas in the governor's budget that we'd like to see the legislature move on.
Is the gas tax, which seems to be captivating the headlines this week, is that an example of people putting pressure on the governor to repeal the gas tax without coming up with a constructive way of paying for our roads? Is that a good example?
Look, I worked very closely with the legislative leadership on that, and they came forward with a very thoughtful proposal, which is going to take 25 cents off the gas tax at the state level between now and June 30. Some I can afford to do today, which I couldn't do 3 years ago when the transportation fund was bankrupt. Now we've got about 250 million extra in the transportation fund. So I can do 100 million and give people a little bit of relief. And despite what I just said, we've done that on a bipartisan basis, and I'm proud of it.
Scott, Roberto?
Can we go back to, we had talked about this a couple of weeks ago with regard to affordable housing. It seems like there's a great divide between the way the state sees it and the localities see it. And there seems to be a lot of friction. And it seems like the state is dictating down towards the localities where real estate's local. And I think it should be dictated locally, but I don't, I'm not there and I'm speaking from a very naive point of view with regards to your state. But we spoke a lot about this, what is it,
830G.
830G, exactly. And I just would like to have you talk about that a little bit.
Well, I'll start, and then I think Will and David may have a point of view. First of all, that's one of the hundreds of bills coming out of the legislature. We'll see what happens. More importantly, I'd say two things. One of the reasons we have one of the flattest populations in the country is not because we don't have enough jobs. I have 100,000 jobs I can't fill. One of the reasons Connecticut is expensive is because our housing is expensive. I think you guys know that as well as anybody. So I do think the idea of doing more multifamily, not high-rise things, but to scale in some of our towns and cities is a good thing to do. Broadly speaking, look, I think 830G is not the solution. I think it's maybe last option if the towns are not doing the thing themselves. My town of Greenwich, they're coming forward. They're putting in place a 5-year plan. They're going to execute on that plan. And I think that ought to give them some relief from the potential 830G. And I'm also told that maybe there's 6 or 7 830G cases brought statewide on an annual basis. Maybe that's picking up now because the real estate market is so hot. But basically, I love these decisions to be made locally. I believe in local control. And I talked to, my first selectman in Greenwich and others. I think they get it. I think they're going to put in place a plan. So we don't need an 830G to force them to do it.
Yeah, I would just add 830G has been on the books for a while. It's a blunt instrument, an overly blunt instrument, arguably. And Roberto, I think you were referencing some of the other bills that are being put forth and contemplated this session. But, how, to the governor's point, if you look back at Connecticut from a macro perspective, why we haven't grown population wise, I do think a big part of it is we need to have local communities that are welcoming of that growth and want to build housing. And oftentimes, given how dense a state we are, that does mean multifamily, denser housing, transit-oriented development, et cetera. So there's a constant debate around, is it a carrot or a stick? And as the governor said, the belief is in local control. We understand how important that is. But at the same time, I think we need to be realistic to grow the state and to grow the state's economy. We need to build more housing, affordable or just generally more housing, because otherwise folks aren't going to be able to live here and grow that next generation or two of their family there. So it's a delicate balance, but I think the preference from the administration is more carrots than sticks, but we need to get going.
Let me ask you, I also heard that the state has a possession of a tremendous amount of abandoned buildings, et cetera, et cetera. Have those been looked at to convert to housing?
It's dangerous to generalize on this, Governor. I'm happy to go in, and I've looked at some of this, what's called surplus real estate at the state level. Most of it is not in areas where you would see lots of demand for housing, or there's brownfield contamination, an old industrial building that was used by DOT, for example. So, we do own the state does own some very good real estate, but by and large, the surplus real estate is not where the housing demand is going to be.
Okay.
Yeah, Roberta, those old 1960s manufacturing buildings, they don't give us a head start. They penalize us. In order to convert that stuff, I got to get the lead pipes out of there. I got to get the asbestos out of there. It's extraordinary how expensive it is to convert that stuff. Much easier to be outside of Houston, just keep building on that cornfield as you keep moving out of town.
But can you sell some of those things to the private sector, to developers, and let them deal with it, and not put so many restrictions on their ability to work with them, they're willing to adopt the risk to take advantage of those and create something out of it?
Yep, Roberto, yours for $1. We'll go through with David. We'll show you a lot of these older buildings, and you make a commitment. We're there right with you. Absolutely.
Scott.
It's not that hot a ticket right now, but we're working it.
Okay.
Governor, I want to be respectful of your time. I know that your people might pull you away for an important meeting at 4:30. So one last question before you go, if you do have to leave. What is the big idea that you're going to want to be remembered for? What's the legacy? What is the one big, most important thing on your mind right now?
Well, when I came into office, I thought the place was a bit of a mess, and it was fiscal crisis and $4 billion deficit. Getting our fiscal house in order was number one. But I think longer term, it's making sure we have the best workforce in the world. I mean, I don't have oil, I don't have silicon, but we got a really good workforce, and the nature of work is changing dramatically. So what that means in terms of transportation and broadband and education is really what we got to do. I mean, every single business that David and I talk to, we do this on him on a daily, me on a weekly basis. The number one question they ask us is workforce. Do you have the workforce? Can they move here? Are there places for them to be? Are they trained? And what do you got? Otherwise, I'm going to go elsewhere. So if I got one priority right now, it's to make sure our education system, our community college system, our technical high school system is all oriented towards the jobs that are out there unfilled right now. mean, unemployment is almost an old-fashioned concept in this country and in Connecticut. We've got well over 100,000 jobs I can't fill. Some of it is getting people off the sidelines ready to work. Some of it is making sure they're trained for the jobs out there. So if I had one passion.
Well, remember, the question is your legacy. So what you would be remembered for was the guy who created quality jobs and filled them with quality Connecticut knowledge workers. Is that what you want to be remembered for?
Turned around the state. We were flat as a pancake, and we're not going to grow jobs, grow businesses, manufacturing unless we have the workforce. I think, I know taxes and print, I think the quality of our workforce is the most important attribute that I can sell right now. And people won't know about that, but they'll know that this is a state that was shrinking for 30 years and it started growing again in early 2020s.
Remember, John, he doesn't want to be remembered for another 4 years.
Got it.
Too young to be remembered.
Little
All right,
premature to ask that legacy question.
Hey, Shiva, nice to see you. Keep your eyes on the road, though. You're focused. Hey, guys, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lamont.
Appreciate the opportunity and ask Lehman really hard questions.
Oh, you bet. No more softballs now.
That's right. Income tax, affordable housing. What's next?
Scott, you got one?
Well, actually, let's throw one in that a lot of Connecticut's wealthiest residents have chosen to decamp and head down to Florida or to other low tax areas. And a huge driver behind that, when you talk to them, is the estate tax. And when that happens, of course, we don't get the estate tax money. And by the way, we lose huge philanthropic dollars and big economic opportunities. Is there any plans in order to address the estate tax?
So yes is the short answer. So, and this was put in place initially in 2017 or 18. So the estate tax, the exemption has moved up to the federal threshold. I think it's around 13 million now, if I'm not mistaken. So yes, the state still has an estate tax, but it is for very, very large estates. And Scott, we can debate if keeping those folks here, if they would stay here, that we make more in the income tax. But the goal was to get it to a high enough level where if the state's not taxing you, if the federal government's not taxing you, where perhaps the dissuading some of those decisions to decamp, to your point, I think the reality, so that's what has been done. In terms of eliminating it fully, it still raises roughly 200 million a year, so about 1% of the budget. And to the comments around the legislature, the governor, I don't think he took a look at eliminating the estate tax fully, but we tried to eliminate the gift tax in 2019 in his first year, and there was significant pushback. And that's a tax that only generates $10 million per year. So with the legislature, in terms of where there's agreement, there was not agreement on the gift tax. And I think fully eliminating the estate tax would be equally hard. It's something I have looked at, but I think getting it to a level where it is, not most people, even most wealthy people, most very wealthy people, let me say it that way, still would not be paying it in Connecticut is where we are right now. But I realize we've not eliminated it.
The governor talked about a balanced approach. And so, I've heard that we need to invest in infrastructure. We need to invest in education. We have to reduce our taxes. So, but we can't do all of these things at the same time.
Well, we can't if we're growing. And to your, the governor's left now, but when I think about the governor, and I didn't know him before, I actually cold called him in the January of 2019. I was working in the private sector. I was commuting to New York City, Roberto, and the governor.
If I want to work for the governor, do I just cold call him? Is that a good idea?
You could listen. It worked for me.
Not anymore, because David's going to answer the phone and hang up on you.
For any of you realtors who aren't having a good year, just cold call the governor.
Right. That's
you could
great.
be a commissioner.
Yeah, so it's the most fulfilling job I've had, but most challenging job as well. But I mention it because I think the governor, when I see him operating, what he'll be remembered by is I think there's a business-like pragmatism. He reminded me a bit of Mike Bloomberg, if you'll forgive the analog, in terms of how he decides in a world that is increasingly divided left and right. The goal is, John, to your point, to balance, and I think that's what you saw from us in COVID around taxes. We're trying to make what we think are the right decisions, but in a world where everyone's polarized.
I have to say that of all the crazy ideas that come down from Hartford, none of them come out of your office. I have to say, I get scared every day from some legislative proposal right now, a 2% real estate tax across the state scares me. Anything that chips away local zoning control scares me. Anything that chips away local control of our schools scares me. But none of those crazy ideas are coming from the governor's office. So I actually do feel better knowing that the governor has said here today that, you know, he's not behind these, and he's not going to allow these crazy ideas to proliferate. So I'm going to ask Scott's question a little differently. We lose people to Florida. If I look at Russell Barksdale and a guy who's trying to take care of the elderly, retain the elderly in Connecticut, what is our strategy for keeping these elderly from moving out? Well, every time, it's not just a tax issue. What are we doing to make sure that we keep the bucket from leaking?
Well, the governor mentioned at the outset, I believe, no income tax on pensions and retirement income up to, I believe it's roughly around $100,000. So, I think the goal is to try to make the state more affordable for that group, because I think it is affordability. Kids are out of school, kids may be in New York or elsewhere. That is one of the biggest factors that we hear, certainly anecdotally, and I've seen some data as well. So, limiting or eliminating income tax at that group. The property tax credit that the governor is pushing for as well makes it more affordable. So a lot of the tax cuts have been focused in that area, because we realize we've lost retirees, and we want to make sure that folks feel like they can continue to live in Connecticut and not leave into camp.
As an economist, you have to agree that the elderly consume fewer services. They cost us less. So really, it makes economic sense to try and keep our 60-year-olds because they cost less.
Yeah, we need to do a bit. So if you look at the data, agreed. And I think the punchline is, if you look at the data, again, the state really hasn't grown its population meaningfully in 3 decades. And again, some of that I think is what I call a culture of not seeking growth at the state level or at the local level, candidly. But we need to do a better, where the state's done a good job, and even better job during COVID, is that 25 to 45 households that are forming, looking for more space, more the traditional folks maybe leaving the cities or coming to Connecticut. As the governor mentioned, college students, we need to do a much better job keeping them here, a stickiness with internships and jobs in the state, and then retirees, and not just 65 and older, but at that 55 and older. That's where you start to see people leave Connecticut, because maybe our high quality education isn't as relevant to them at that point in time. So that's where the efforts need to be focused. We want to retain all people here as we need to grow.
I think we do a pretty good job of attracting the younger people, younger people who come here for our schools. I think that we have a reputation, a 50-year reputation for great schools, and that's known. We've done a good job of marketing that in New York, and we attract younger people. I think that Florida is doing a really good job of marketing, our older people out, and that's why I sort of focused on them.
Yeah, we need to keep fighting the fight there, because obviously the weather we can't do anything about. If people want sunshine and no winter, that we regardless of what policy happens in Hartford, that's tougher. But the property tax rebate and credit and the lack of income taxes, that is something we can do to ease the burden, and I think we'll move the needle.
I have heard from some wealthy Fairfield County people who've taken a look at Florida, and they said, if I sell my house for, pick a number, $5 million here, and I go there, I'm going to pay 2% every year. I'm going to pay $100,000 in property taxes on a $5 million piece of real estate every year. And so they're really weighing the fact that South Florida real estate prices have gone up to the point to negate some of that tax benefit. And so if we just hold the line on our own taxes, we may see some of those people return.
Not to mention there's no inventory there either.
Right.
David, as a question, we're going to ask the governor this question, but we'll ask you this one too. You happen to be in a really interesting position when COVID struck. And so it's 2028, and your replacement, since you're happily retired and still living in Greenwich, not down in Florida,
Exactly.
called up and said, we got the next pandemic going on, David. What do we need to do here in Connecticut? How would you help him out?
Yeah, I mean, assuming the first question is, and I think back often to March of 2020 and what we knew versus what we know now, and obviously with the benefit of hindsight, you can debate what should have been done earlier, what shouldn't have been done at all. But in my mind, and again to my point before about the decision making, I remember vividly myself and the Commissioner of Public Health working very closely together with the governor, with the Reopen Committee. Again, this was right in the heat of COVID when we didn't know a lot about what data is available, what do we think is that right balance between, I don't want to say lives and livelihoods, but making sure that we're taking the data coming in, like the governor likes to discuss. We kept our parks and beaches open. Not every state did that. We kept our golf courses open. Forget about keeping manufacturing and construction open and real estate, obviously, which we knew was critical. But you got to remember that now we know a lot more about COVID. There were our neighboring states that were shutting down their state beaches. It made no sense to us. So
I have to say that, we're going to be remembered for that. They're going to say, in Connecticut, the golf courses never close, even in a pandemic, even in nuclear bombs could go off in Connecticut and they don't close the beaches. They don't close the golf courses. What does that say about us, David?
Yeah. Well, I think it's this gets to that balance, right? I don't think there is a tendency, I think, by some to kind of arguably overreact, and you could argue others underreacted. And we tried to strike that right balance where it wasn't a political thing, golfing, we shouldn't let people golf. It's outside. 2 people do it. Maybe 1 people does the other. Like, is the risk of an airborne disease great? No,
we shut down high school football, and that was super controversial at the time.
I know that didn't make me very popular in New Canaan. And we could talk about hockey on a whole nother podcast. That was even worse. But
I know.
No, but I think, Scott, to your point, it's make sure you're even keel and balanced as opposed to gravitating to a very conservative outcome, because I think there's a cost to everything, and I think that's what I learned. There's a cost benefit to everything, including pandemic management, and I think that's really important. You can't assume shutting down everything or stopping everything there's no cost, because the reality is there was a significant cost, economic and social.
Do you think we were too conservative or too liberal, or we got most of it right?
No, I think we got most of it right. Again, with the benefit of hindsight, you can debate fine tuning that. The governor's been asked the question before when I've been on with him, and I do think if we stop things a bit earlier, meaning if we shut down certain things earlier, I think we probably could have restarted a little bit earlier. But at the same time, you just didn't know then. So I think overall, I think it was appropriate. And if you look at us, certainly relative to states of similar density within the region, Connecticut was a leader in trying to enable as much activity to happen as possible, whether it's in 2020 or we were the first state in 2021 to get rid of all restrictions between the mid-Atlantic and up here. So again, to go back to if Florida obviously handled it differently, where they let pretty much anything happen, we didn't think that was appropriate. But for states on the eastern seaboard, we felt like we were a leader in trying to, again, have the right balance and let as much activity happen as possible without jeopardizing the healthcare system.
David, being on the front line in healthcare, I think very proud of the state and the response that the state has had to you and your team and to the governor. I think, hindsight's always 2020. The only criticism I could provide, and this really has to do with more of DPH and DSS and everything of that nature, is when we were asked by the governor's office and the state to open up a COVID hospital, a second hospital, we were required to jump through all the hoops and to go through all the barriers if we were opening up a brand new hospital. So if hindsight was 2020, the impact on the hospital on day one was significant. And for other healthcare providers like Waveney Life Care and others I know that the governor were reaching out to, we would open up another hospital. Silver Hill opened up a hospital in day one, taking that compression away from the emergency department where people were just being reinfected. So that's the only thing as a healthcare professional that I would have asked, in hindsight, if going forward, if we had an emergency plan in place where we could set up these hospital systems and take some of that compression away and start saving lives.
Fair point. Thank you.
Yeah, do we have those plans in place? Do you feel confident, Russell, that we did make any permanent changes?
I would have to defer to the governor and the governor's office. I still believe that if another pandemic besides COVID hit, we would still have to jump through all those hoops, even if we were trying to help our local hospitals set up another hospital for just COVID and decompress the hospitals. I think that would be very, very important. And certainly we have the facilities in our area and throughout the state to be able to do it, and the healthcare professionals to be able to do it. Of course, with the shortage of nurses, and David and I have talked about how to recruit more nurses in nursing schools that we set up, and we're certainly in the mix of doing that. But being able to take that pressure off the hospitals would have been huge early on.
So that's another industry. It's the medical industry. We've already talked about the education industry. Connecticut is very good at education. We're very good at healthcare. I think we have some of the best hospitals and hospital chains in the country. We're looking at next generation manufacturing. So for the realtors on the call, what kind of industries are we targeting? Can we expand on what we've already said? We've talked about manufacturing in the east side of the state. We've talked about using our existing university system, colleges and university system. Can we talk more about the recruiting of businesses and job creation in the state? Because that's really what's going to fill up these houses.
Yeah, and I would say, and we talked a little bit about it before the governor, if you look at a high level, two of the biggest industries by labor force and contribution to the economy, finance and insurance, and now as the governor was saying, it's really finance and insurtech. And if you're looking at that, John and group here, it's around the Stamford area, and then it's the Hartford area. Hartford obviously more insurance focused, but as I think we like to say, we want to be disrupting, not disrupted, and these are core industries of ours. So there's a big focus on, the governor referenced the digital currency groups bringing 300 jobs in their headquarters to Stamford. They have ambitious goals in terms of further expanding in the ecosystem that they operate in. But outside of finance and insurance, manufacturing is more than just the east side of the state. So the governor references 3 large OEMs in aerospace and defense. So you have Lockheed Martin, Sikorsky in Stratford. You have Pratt & Whitney, as well as Collins Aerospace, part of Raytheon in the central part of the state. And then General Dynamics Electric Boat in the eastern part of the state, all of which are growing. Electric Boat is growing the most, but so manufacturing is still roughly 10% of Connecticut's labor force. That actually has come down a lot since 1980, but since 2015, it's been growing. And we have one of the highest densities of aerospace and defense. Again, this is less so for Fairfield County, just given where these plants are, but you have 3 large OEMs, and then you have lots of, you have roughly 4,000 other manufacturers where the median number of employees is 20 or 25. That is an area we expect to grow, and it'll be precision manufacturing. Beyond that, life sciences, you're getting the map up here. Life sciences and biotech is a really strong sector for us, one that's smaller than the 2 I just mentioned, but fast growing alongside healthcare. That kind of eds and meds market's really driving New Haven, in addition to other industries which are starting to come in. But I think that will continue to be a pharma and bioscience hub in particular. And then the last 2 sectors where we, again, I'm not just making Fairfield County comments here, but food technology, and we learned a little bit more about this in Israel, consumer products, making sure that we're continuing to disrupt as it relates to agriculture, I think is increasingly important, and we're spending more time there and more time recruiting there. And then lastly, renewables, renewable energy, offshore wind, solar, the state is going to continue to make more investments there and try to grow our footprint, because we just think it's great from a jobs perspective, and we think will continue to be increased urgency alongside, hydrocarbons. They're not going away anytime soon, but more focus on renewables, and the jobs that are going to be driven from renewables is a focus too.
So here's a map of the state, and what struck me was that the growth was spread rather evenly around the state. Darien was the only top 10 for growth of the last 20 years in Fairfield County. But I would attribute that, this is fintech down here, financial services and insurance down here. But you're saying that there's manufacturing, and you see there's plenty of growth on the eastern end of the state, and you're attributing a lot of that to the resurgence of manufacturing and electric boat.
Yeah, I think manufacturing. You also have, the 2 tribal casinos are right around where you are now as well. So Mohegan Sun and Foxwoods, and they've started to expand as well. One of the things the governor led was sports gaming, which folks have likely seen. But yeah, manufacturing and the tribal casinos are the two biggest employers in that part of the state. And sorry, John, just to make sure I understand, this is price appreciation or population increase? The nomenclature is throwing me off a little bit here.
This is a price appreciation of houses. Since we're
Okay.
all realtors, that's what we focus on.
Okay, price appreciation. I just want to make sure I understood. So Greenman house price is higher, not more people live in there.
Right, and some
Yeah.
of the, so like
So-
7 of the top 10 are up there in the Northwest. And I guess it's a response to COVID that people are seeking out the bargains and the ruralness in Salisbury, Sharon, Cornwall, Kent, Warren, Washington, Colebrook, Connecticut.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
were impossible to get to, but with the lessening importance of the New York commute, I guess now if you don't have to commute 5 days a week, you can afford to move up there.
But
That's right.
As part of the appreciation up in that corner, large estates that sold where you have a low number of sales, but they're dominated by big dollar volumes.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry, John, go ahead.
You might be surprised, Roberto, but you can go up there and buy a house for $250,000 for most of the last 20 years. So when you see price appreciation there, that 250 became 350. That's why it's leading the state. So the 2.5 million in Greenwich, has to come to a $3.5 million average. Greenwich hasn't done that yet.
Sure. I'm actually pretty impressed with how evenly that map looks. It's that's very good.
Yeah, the one I would just let me re-hone my previous answer though. I thought it was population first. I think some of what you may be seeing in Eastern Connecticut is just a lower base price. So I think prices might be up more because they're, if you go back to the late 90s or 2000, the casinos just started in the mid 90s. Electric boat wasn't as strong as they were now. So I just think you're seeing that growth is driving house prices and a lower base there. And obviously what you're seeing in the Wilton, Weston area where you haven't seen the prices. I think some of that is this focus away from the big estates towards smaller lots closer to 95 and trains. And you've seen certainly 2010 to present, you've seen that, but I presume that's what's happening there as well.
They seem to be stuck in that middle ground where they're not truly rural, and yet they're not really on the path.
That's right. That's right. You're still paying a lot, but it's two acre zone in, still 15 minutes away from a train station.
Right.
Scott?
Not sure I have a whole bunch.
I want to ask about the war. So if nobody else has a question, we're looking at the war. We're looking at a lot of anxiety in the capital markets. We're looking at anxiety over inflation. We're looking at, the war is just one of about 6 or 7 things that are weighing on the market. Gas prices, the price of oil. So as the senior economic advisor to the governor, how are we trying to, respond to that? When we see spiking gas prices, somebody in the legislature says, then, let's do a tax holiday. I mean, we seem to be whack-a-mole, on some of these issues.
Yeah,
Talk to us about your perspective on some of these crises and how they're affecting our outlook.
Well, listen, I think the general view is we need to control what we can control. And obviously, war in the Ukraine is well out of the sphere of what we can control. But as the governor was mentioning, and there was and will be and should be a discussion, just given the increased inflation, which, outside of reducing expenses, reducing taxes in the very short term, we're not able to reduce prices, right? Even the Federal Reserve starting to increase interest rates. And I do think you'll see inflation subside, but it's going to take some time. So I think what we can do is discussions around the property tax credit, again, which goes directly to Connecticut residents, gas tax holiday, partial, et cetera. That's the discussion on easing the burden that's going to happen between now and the end of the legislative session, which is early May.
What about Eversource? What about some of the highest energy costs in the country? And we have to say, well, even if oil doesn't go to $200 a barrel, we have a problem now, and we're not producing energy. So we did talk a little bit about wind. Is wind going to really change the equation for us in Connecticut on energy?
So there's a lot to unpack there, John. So I think, let me start from the back to the front. I do think wind is a game changer. If we were having this in 2025 or 2028, I still think it's not there. I think this is over the next 10 to 20 years when you're going to see I think it's 2.5 gigawatts of offshore wind that's been procured. And I do think that plus the nuclear, we still have Millstone in the state. I think those are both very important because the reality is on our energy prices, and again, I was in the private sector, I paid my taxes and got my driver's license. I didn't really focus on this before. Getting natural gas to the Northeast in New England is quite expensive. So there's generation cost in this area. It's not unique to Connecticut. If you look at Massachusetts and other states around us, it's expensive. There's just, and the ability to get another pipeline, very, very hard to do. So I think we need to focus on renewables that aren't going to be subject to these fluctuations, and over time minimize natural gas. Again, I think it's going to need to be there for a while, but I don't think there's a near-term fix to those energy costs other than diversifying over the long term to minimize fluctuations and minimize our reliance on what are expensive hydrocarbons. I just think that's the nature of the energy beast here. So I think it's very, in short, I think it's very tough to limit that Eversource bill given what those costs are. And I think the investments in renewables and making sure we in Massachusetts are a leader, and Rhode Island for that matter, on stuff like offshore wind, working together to keep costs down, that's going to be a big focus. Sorry, I don't know if I answered your full question. If there was a part of it there, I forgot.
No, you did. I'm a little disappointed that you don't have a quick fix. You said it's a long-term fix and it relies on renewables. I was hoping that there was some short-term plans because some people are looking at a 50% increase in their fuel bills and this year, and they just don't have it.
It's frustrating. No, and I understand. And this gets back to what we can do. Those costs are those costs, right? So the question is there a way I keep going back to the property tax credit or other cash is fungible for folks at a certain income level that are dealing with higher costs at the Eversource, higher costs at the pump, in the grocery store, et cetera, making sure that they're getting that relief through the property tax credit or reduced income tax. That's the best move that we've got. And that's the discussion that's going to be happening over the next 6 weeks, going to some of those producers and trying to control their costs. Most of it would take legislation. I just think that's a harder way to do it in terms of where we can really affect the outcome.
I know the municipal government in New Canaan has made a big push with Eversource to bring natural gas into especially the schools and businesses in downtown and restaurants where it makes sense. Natural gas is finally in New Canaan after 100 years, finally arrived in the last couple of years. And I know that Wilton, same thing is true. So a lot of the towns that have never even had the option are getting that option now. And I think that's important. In addition to that, we're starting to see a much bigger uptake on solar. All of our schools have solar panels on the roof, as does the town hall. So I'm wondering whether the state is looking at making more incentives for solar and gas and trying to get people, because a hardened infrastructure has got to be good for Connecticut, where we're not all relying on only oil.
So I wouldn't say there's more incentives, but the state has pretty significant incentives for renewables and investing in energy efficiency, solar on the roof, and that will continue. And we've seen pretty good take up. There, like many things you've heard from me here and the governor, there's a balance though, right? Because some of those programs where there is a subsidy, that can be added on to Eversource bills and increase the broader charge. So if you try to go too quickly, that'll actually increase costs as opposed to reduce costs. So you need to think about payback period, return on investment when you're doing this, not to all of a sudden go at once, because that's going to, again, that's going to make it more expensive versus less expensive in the short term, even though we think the payback is there over the medium to long term.
I'm glad you answered it that way, because I've been told, sitting on the town council, that the subsidies are diminishing over time. And so I'm glad you explained that one of the rationale for diminishing the subsidies is because we can't shift the burden to the rest of the taxpayers at this time.
That's how I think about it. The way I think about this in lay terms is there's an overall cost to the grid, right? And we get storms and things come in. Ultimately, those costs need to be borne. And if all of a sudden we go full renewable right now, those costs are still going to be borne, or the fixed costs are still going to be borne. So that's the balance. And then obviously there's tax credits at the federal level too for many of these renewable technologies. So we'll keep at it. Connecticut has been a leader, and I think we want to remain a leader. But I think going faster may be more expensive expensive here. So I think we need to always evaluate that.
Well, thank you. This has been a very content-packed hour. I got all of my hard questions, like, am I really going to see a 2% property tax statewide? And I think I heard no. And am I going to hear crazy proposals from the legislature? And what I heard was very reassuring. Well, you might, but the governor and Will Haskell are going to fight like heck to keep them from becoming reality. And
That's
I
right.
really like what I heard at the top of the hour about your trip to Israel and recruiting, that you guys are not only out there first, but you're out there personally. And I think those are three outstanding things that I heard. So how about you, Scott or Roberto?
I didn't hear read my lips, but I did hear no new taxes. So that was big.
I love that. All right. Well, thank you, David. Any parting words? You want the last word? You got it.
No, this is great. Appreciate you guys having me and look forward to continuing the conversation. And if there's anything does come up in Hartford that you want to know, is this really, are there legs or is this moving? Give me a call.
Okay. And you got any job openings for those of us who want to cold call you?
Just cold call me after this for sure.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Be careful what you wish for though. All right, thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you so
Scott.
much.
Thank
Really
you,
appreciate
Roberto. Thank you,
Johnny.
everybody.
John.
Scott,
Great, Roberto, enjoy.
see ya.
Thank you.